He invented the original photocopier. We always say, don't do it. You have to be convinced. Then you definitely shouldn't do it. On paper, it was, probably the wrong decision in terms of we sold for kind of the mid 8 figures, and then the company grew to a $500 million valuation. There's been a huge amount of innovation and investment into diet and exercise, but sleep has not improved over my lifetime, at least. I think a month of software is probably 3 times easier than an hour of hardware. 73% of our code base is AI. I think the scale of innovation.
Just go and do it and see what happens.
Ideas are worth like jack shit, absolute jack shit. Like if you can't execute, there's nothing.
Just take that initiative to actually take whatever crazy ideas that they might have and just try to see what comes of it.
Don't be afraid of ambition. Chase it, love it, wrap your arms around it and say it out loud.
New Zealanders don't know any better. They will just get up and give it a shot. That's why we were first to get to the top of Mount Everest.
Go to dream that ultimate dream. Like, what is it that you ultimately want to do? And it's all achievable.
Harry, awesome for you to join us on TechMates. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Super excited to have you. You are a serial founder. You're currently working on a venture at Sleep, which we'll get to, but you've built a company called Fanfix before in your early days. That's not that long ago, but you were still in college. But we want to start with your family history, actually. So from what I read, you're not the first entrepreneur in the family. And you seem to have a lot of hardware background as well in your family. So would love to start with that. So tell us more about where entrepreneurship comes from in your family.
Yeah, did we get correctly that your grandpa actually invented something related to the printing press? Was that right?
It was my great-great-grandfather was a guy called Harry Gestetner. He invented the original photocopier, and then he has the first patent for the ballpoint pen. And then he also invented the kind of nail clipper that we all use today.
Is that right?
Sort of, little thing that flips around and the curved edge. So he's invented a bunch of things, but his most famous was the photocopier, and then created a business around it called Gestetner, which is my last name, and grew to very large business, kind of doing billions in revenue. And then my great grandfather ran it.
Did you say billions? Like back in the early 1900s?
Well, it was founded in 1881. That's when he invented the original photocopier, which was called the duplicator. And then his family business and ended up growing to kind of 30,000 employees, I think. Billions in revenue, and was a public company in the UK. In the FTSE 100, and then my great grandfather ran it, and then my grandfather ran it, and then they sold it in, I believe, the late 80s. So unfortunate kind of hardware runs.
That's incredible. So what was that like growing up? Was there a lot of lore about the business? Did you learn a lot about business early on?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think, businesses these days, I mean, you look at even the biggest businesses in the world, and they tend to kind of last. Every business kind of gets disrupted at some point. And you look at the car, even is, the kind of engine is getting disrupted now by electric. And so, the car probably had about 100 years, search with Google might have had kind of 25 years, kind of now getting disrupted by these AI models. And I think what's kind of cool is with the inventions that he made, we're kind of getting to the tail end of the photocopier. I think obviously printers and kind of more of a digital world is definitely a less relevant invention than it was, or tool than it was kind of 20 years ago. But still, I mean, it's very much still used today, and it's had a good 150-year run, which is pretty incredible.
Impressive, yeah.
And so that was very inspiring. And I think it's actually a funny story with the ballpoint pen that he invented. It was actually indirectly, ink was splurging from within the kind of duplicating machine he'd invented. So he invented this sort of ballpoint that made the ink flow much more consistently. And then it basically had a very large pen inside of the duplicating machine. And so Laszlo Biro, who, the company Biro, which in Europe, when I was growing up, that was kind of the largest pen company. They were the ballpoint pens. When he tried to patent the kind of quote unquote original ballpoint pen, he couldn't do that because my great grandfather had the original patent on that. That was kind of the prior art. So I think what was really inspiring was to kind of be able to have seen these products that were, out. I mean, obviously I never met my great grandfather. He died, probably 80 years before I was born, nor my great grandfather. But, to be able to kind of hear about and use products that he'd invented kind of well over 100 years prior was really inspiring and sort of inspired me to, think how can I build? I think in venture, we think in kind of 10-year increments, but, how can I build something that, is truly generational and used by 5 generations later would be pretty insane.
Yeah. Right. And I think like with families, there's always lore, right? There's always like a story that either your parents or grandparents kind of tell you as you're growing up that helps shape your mindset and your view of the world. Did you have that given your great grandfather's business background, your grandfather's business background? Did you have that as family lore? Like, I think for most people, thinking about fundamental kind of foundational technology is sort of a very abstract thing, but for you it's very personal. Was there any kind of like applications or implications for you as a young child as you're growing up?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it was, my grandfather ran the company for decades, 30 years or so. And his father, my great grandfather, died when he was 16. And so he really had to, he knew from a very young age, he had to take over the company and step into very big shoes. At the time, they employed thousands of people and it was a big public company. And he took it over when he was, kind of my age or younger. And so I think, hearing the stories from my grandfather was always very inspiring. But then also at the same time, they sold the company in the late 80s. And so the next generation, there were just too many family members to kind of take it over. And so you had, my dad's generation where my dad thought he was going to go into the business and other family members, probably thought they were going to go into the business and then kind of, very suddenly found out that they had to go and sort of create their own, build something of themselves. And they kind of didn't have that safety net. And then obviously my generation, were kind of the first to not grow up with a family business. I always knew from a young age, it's kind of very inspiring to hear about all this and kind of see it. But it's done now. And so I got to build something myself.
And your dad went and became an entrepreneur himself and built his own thing, right?
Yeah. He's also a founder and he's built a ton of different businesses. So, I got to see growing up and we're actually working on Orion together, which is really good fun. And, got to see growing up kind of some of the glamorous side of being a founder, but most of the really unglamorous side of being a founder. It always just kind of felt like it was, in the blood and what I kind of wanted to do. And, I think often hear founders kind of talk about how they accidentally ended up becoming a founder. That definitely wasn't the case for me. I always just knew as what I wanted to do. And, kind of, I'd been able to see a family holiday, I saw how hard founders work. I saw that really there's no, family holidays where dad or family members, would kind of join late or not be able to come, or we'd have to cancel last second sort of thing. And, weekends, like there was no clock in and clock out. Weekends, I always remember as a kid, my dad working the whole time. And my mum also had a business, a frozen yogurt company, which ended up becoming the largest frozen yogurt company in kind of outside the US. So same with her, saw her kind of working round the clock as well and saw some of the very stressful moments, kind of sale processes of various different businesses. And so, yeah, I was very, very fortunate to kind of not only see the upside, but also really see the downside, which kind of a lot of founders don't realize it's not that glamorous most of the time.
Until they're in it, right?
Exactly.
And I think you have a quote somewhere about founders aren't made, they're born, right?
I think so.
And you feel that from your experience that certain people just have a innate personality trait for them.
I think so. I think it's a very difficult thing to coach and teach and cultivate. I think that I often get asked when I'm talking to young founders or, being interviewed in places that say, what would you say to young people who, to convince them to start businesses or who want to kind of be entrepreneurs? I always say, like, don't do it. If you have to be convinced, then you definitely shouldn't do it. And if you're going into it for things like money, it's definitely not the right career path to go into if you're interested in money or glamour. There are plenty of other industries where you can make a lot of money and have a lot of glamour. Being a founder, I mean, you can get some of that, but really just it's too hard to the point where if you aren't born to do it, and if you don't really just have a sort of innate fire within you where there's this insatiable appetite to build, then you really shouldn't do it. It's a crazy thing. I mean, you think about being a founder. I mean, we take kind of, 9 out of 10 companies fail. I think it's 0.4% of businesses have a successful exit. So really, like, founders, typically smart people. Those smart people could get great jobs elsewhere, earn a ton of cash. You defer taking any sort of decent sized salary for a very long time. You take on a huge amount of pressure, huge amount of risk, personal stress, and push for an extremely long time, typically much longer than you anticipate, all for kind of a 0.4% chance of real success. So it's something that you got to really want to do and kind of feel like you have to do.
Harry, and it's really a good kind of segue into asking, like, why do you do it? Because given all the negatives of what you just described, it's a very tough thing. Success is very, it's like, that Ernest Shackleton quote when he was like gathering his men to go to Antarctica, and he was like, men wanted hazardous journey, like cold days, very little like food, success not guaranteed, but eternal glory, like if successful or something like that. I don't, what I'm talking about? Like,
yeah.
Why do you do it? I mean, you've done a couple of companies that are very different from each other. So, I mean, I know some founders, I've also heard this thing of like the fox and the hedgehog, like kind of like some founders are just like, they just love doing startups. Others just care about one idea. They just focus on this one idea like their entire lives. And you seem to kind of just, have a lot of different ideas and different things you focus on, different products you've built. Why do you do it?
I think different people are wired in different ways. For example, lots of people are wired for different career paths. Some people are wired to make super successful doctors, or super successful artists, or, screenwriters, or just like, for me, I've always been pretty damn bad at everything except for this one thing. I was always, one of the last picks on, for kind of any sort of sport, when I was a kid growing up. I was never particularly academic or good at any subject. I kind of got rejected from most colleges I applied to, got rejected from pretty much every single job or internship I ever applied to. So really, like, this was the only thing I was good at. I didn't have much choice. But also, it was just, it wasn't really something I thought about. I just always wanted to be building. And, from age 11, I remember kind of building my first company. Started when I was 11. It was a clothing company called Legionary Clothing. And, that I had all sorts of companies. Tried to turn my parents' garage into storage facility for local businesses, and had an affiliate shoe website. And I think it's Harry Gestetner from 20VC has a theory of, he likes to back founders who kind of have found some way when they were young to make money. And I think what that really shows is just that you're not getting into this world. You're not trying to become a founder for sort of the wrong reasons, or the kind of sexiness or glamour of it. You're doing it because this is just what you always needed and wanted to be doing, and it's just the way you're wired. And yeah, I think it's just the way I'm wired. I just love to build things, and I love to find something that I'm pretty singularly obsessed with, and it's fun to do different challenges. So, with Fanfix, we took an industry I didn't know, my partner Simon and I, we didn't know anything about kind of social media or influencers or creators. We didn't really know any creators or how to get access, and we didn't know anything about software at all. We really knew nothing about anything, but it was really good fun to kind of, try and learn all that from first principles. And then, we got very lucky and had a great outcome. with Orion,
Yeah.
I mean, totally different industry, kind of.
Maybe to start with Fanfix, because that was your first really big success. Maybe take us back to the kind of early days of that, how that came about. And you were in the early days of your college experience as well, right? When you started it.
Yeah. So before that, we had a charity that we started beginning of COVID, and called Fuel Our Heroes. Essentially, COVID was my second year of college, sophomore year. We were all my friends, we were all sent home from school, and I was with a couple of my friends, and we were talking. We've got this extensive network of friends from all these different colleges around the country. We all went to different colleges, and they're all in these cities at home, and have nothing to do. How can we leverage that network to raise money for healthcare workers? So we ended up using social media. We created all these various different viral challenges. So, for example, there was one which was I went to school called Tulane. It was the SIA Tulane memory, or SIA University of Texas memory, or SIA Vanderbilt memory. Sender Texas Vanderbilt Tulane memory, and donate $5. And that went pretty viral. And you had all these college kids who really, they were sitting at home. They all wanted to be at school. They were all kind of reminiscing of their time in college, and so they all wanted to be posting that on social media. And also had the virality aspect of you post a picture with your friends, and so you tag your friends, and then they do it, and then also you donate. And so we ended up raising around $500,000 for healthcare workers and hospital systems, 20 different hospital systems, mainly through kind of $5, $10 donations from college students around the country.
That's cool.
We saw the power of social media. And then TikTok, end of 2020, was kind of massively rapidly growing. And so you have this whole generation of all these creators now with all this distribution in their pockets as a result of TikTok. But really, the vast majority were struggling to monetize. They had no way to make money. And I saw a stat at the time that 55% of Gen Z aspire to be a creator when they grow up.
Why is that?
Well, I think humans are fundamentally creative. I also think it's like there's the quote, in the future, everyone will be famous for 5 minutes. So I think, humans are also quite vain and want to be famous. And so I think it's, being a creator is a sort of perfect mix between, it's a creative output plus you get the sort of glamorous potential upside of getting famous, making a lot of money. And it's kind of pretty accessible to most people. So you can just do it from your bedroom. And also the payback period is pretty quick. Like you could wake up tomorrow morning and be internationally famous. That's never happened before in history. So I think, all of that was happening. And so we thought, what if we could create this platform that would solve the monetization platform for creators, take this 55% of Gen Z that aspires to be a creator, and is creating content, and actually turn that into a viable career path. And so we founded the business, and to kind of condense it, we got very fortunate, scaled very rapidly. It was great timing. And then we ended up getting acquired by Superordinary, which is probably the largest social commerce company in the US. And I joined Superordinary as chief digital officer as well. I was 21 when we sold the company, and it was actually still in college. It was the month I graduated that the acquisition went through.
Wow.
And
so then you've been running the company for about a year.
It was about a year, yeah. It was 10 months from launch to exit, so it's very quick. And great timing.
What was the scale of the company when you sold in terms of like users, revenue?
Yeah, I think we were pretty small. I think we were about a million revenue, couple million revenue. But I think, and we got an amazing multiple on that. I think I always say you want to couple not sold. You want to sell off irrationality rather than sort of fundamentals. At the time, it was an extremely hot market, end of 2021, beginning of 22. And so, we were in a very hot space, creator economy time. It was very hot. And so, we sold obviously off irrationality. And then, the scale we grew the company to 120 million revenue and $500 million valuation. And it
after it had been acquired.
After it had been acquired, yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Stayed on as CEO for 3 years afterwards, and then Superordinary was scaled to 350 million revenue and team about 650, and and then that's kind of, I started to get pretty burnt out as a founder. I've been just go this whole time and really neglected kind of, I didn't think of myself as a sort of athlete or as a high performance person. I thought of myself as like, I need to roll out of bed as early as I can and just work until I go to sleep and rinse and repeat every day. And so, started to get super interested in longevity and performance.
Harry, before we go into that, do you regret selling? Given what you saw happen after you sold, how big it got, do you regret selling?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the on paper and then there's the sort of in practice. I think on paper it was, probably the wrong decision in terms of sold for kind of, the mid 8 figures and then, the company kind of, grew to a $500 million valuation.
10x, basically, a 10x from where you sold it.
Give or take. I think in practice, I was 21 when we sold. We needed to raise money very easily. Business kind of very easily could have failed. Maybe some critical things that kind of may or may not have happened. We were able to set ourselves up in a way where we got a good chunk of the company back in the earnout because we kind of blew through the milestones we had so quickly, and then also it set us up in a way where for my next company I could kind of swing for the fences and not have to worry about personal runway or anything like that. So I think from kind of a personal standpoint, the business was a ton of fun. I was never a user of the product, and it was never my sort of life's passion, and so I was very happy to kind of move on and do something that.
How did you get the idea for it? I mean, so you had the charity and you saw the power of social media, but then what prompted you to start it, and what insight did you have that other folks at the time didn't have?
I think so. What prompted us to do it is my cousin blew up on TikTok, saw kind of same thing. My co-founder Simon, his parents were living in a building that basically got taken over by the TikTokers in 2020. And so,
what building was that?
It was called the 10,000 building in LA. And so, we saw all these TikTokers. We saw kind of the top echelon of creators, like the D'Amelios lived in the building and Addison Rae. And, we saw the top kind of 0.1% of creators sort of thriving and making all this money. And then we saw people like my cousin, and the long tail who really just couldn't make ends meet and couldn't make it a viable career. And so we wanted to bridge that gap. And I think the sort of insight we had, that the others didn't. I think this is where we're fortunate. We deeply understood culture and deeply understood, who to hire to kind of build this into a culturally relevant platform and get the right influencers excited to join. I think that was kind of our key to success there.
Interesting. Very cool. And so then you graduate university, you go into a big company. That is a completely different culture shift. And you're sort of like, your peers probably get hired for entry level positions, and you're in there as a senior VP, CEO of a business unit, right? What was that like, both on a personal level, also like, what did you learn?
Yeah, I think it was, it's very interesting. I think we always operated very independently as Fanfix. So I was fortunate that I could build the culture myself. I think when we started the company, we were all best friends, and we all sort of, when it was a small team, we'd all go out together on the weekends, and our social life and work life was very intertwined. And it was very much a bunch of kids kind of just building this cool thing that started around my kitchen table. And then, it got to a point where we realized that the same people, and this is quite typical with companies, but the same people that are good at the 0 to 1 or 0 to 10 are not the same people that are good at the 10 to 100. So there had to come a point where there was a cultural shift to becoming, much more of a growth oriented, kind of performance oriented, company rather than, kind of fun startup with we're all best friends. So it was, so we had to kind of do that shift and then, I was extremely lucky. It was just so much fun. I think it was a fun, we sort of had 2020, 21, 22, 23, we kind of the really cool, the sort of coolest young Hollywood sort of influencer company, and had all these fun parties. And so, it was a huge amount of fun, and a great ride. And then we also, were very lucky to have the backing of a very big company.
Yeah. And how did you learn the culture shift? Like, did you have advisors? Did your dad help you? You just kind of pick it up on your own? Because again, going from like sort of a startup that's you're building with your friends to going into a corporate culture is very, very different.
I think it came pretty naturally. And, we saw within people, I think there's a level of scrappiness that gets you from 0 to 1 or 0 to 10 that, then kind of some people, I think as a founder, and same is true for an employee, you think of building a business from founding to call it exit or IPO. You have to do, say, 1,000 different things along the way, right? And every single one of those 1,000 things, at least, that at first, you've never done before. You gotta you gotta set up a legal entity. You never done that. You gotta figure that out, right? Pretty simple. Then you have an idea for a product. You gotta build that product. You gotta figure out how you build it, right? And then you need to raise money. You never raise money. You need to figure out how to raise money. And then you need to attract great talent and hire. And so you got to figure out how to hire. And then you got to manage, and you got to figure out how to manage people. And then you got to figure out how to sell and how to scale a sales team. And then, HR and scale engineering team. And then you realize all this kind of corporate, this sort of, cultural people don't blend together, or people butt heads, and you got to figure out how to kind of, really manage a team. And so, and then raise money again, but now it's fundamentals based rather than vision based. So I think there are, and then Silicon. So there are 1,000 different things you have to do. And typically you've never done any of them before. You get to a point where you've kind of exhausted all the things you've done, and now it's all new things. And I think just as a founder and as a great employee as well, you have to have the mindset of, I might not have done all these things, but I will figure out a way to do it. I think often you kind of run into, a point where employees, or kind of, early employees, they sort of exhausted the things that they can do, and now at the point where it's things that they've never done before, but they're sort of they struggle with that. And so I think, you sort of naturally saw, we naturally saw what, those sorts of people, and kind of, then replace them with people who were sort of better for the 10 to 100, but those sorts of people maybe weren't the right people for the 0 to 10. I think, it sort of, fell into place and came pretty naturally.
Makes sense.
And you were saying that by the end of the 3 years or so journey, you started to be very burned out. Was that because, you kind of neglected sleep, sports? What drove you into kind of burnout?
Yeah, it was about a 5-year journey, and from kind of founding through me leaving, through exit, through me leaving. And I think for me, I didn't think of myself as an athlete or a high performance person. I thought of myself just as someone who's got to work as hard as I possibly can, as much as I possibly can. And so, I would wake up and I would check, first thing I would do is check my phone, and I would just basically be online and be working largely until I just went to bed. And I'd be on calls until I went to bed, and then I wouldn't sleep that well. And then I'd wake up and do it again. And so I think it was a lot of brute force. And then at a certain point, I started to get burnt out as a founder. And I thought, at the same time, longevity was starting to really become mainstream with people like Andrew Huberman and Brian Johnson and Peter Attia. I saw all these very successful founders who thought of themselves as athletes and as high performance individuals whose job was to not only manage the business, but also manage themselves. And so I wanted to start tracking my sleep. And so I tried the Aura, I tried the Whoop, that I'm wearing right now. And, I first thing I realized was just how badly I was actually sleeping. And that really shocked me. But then also I became a little bit frustrated because, I felt that these devices were telling me I was sleeping badly and basically just telling me to be in bed longer. But really, I was maximizing the amount of hours I had to be in bed for. And so I wanted to get something that not only gave me the data, but also actually did something to solve the problem. And so I ended up meeting Dr. Michael Bruce, who's probably the top sleep doctor in the world. And he kept on reiterating that body temperature is the number one controllable component of sleep quality. And, if you look at the, longevity, it's sleep, diet, exercise. Sleep is really the cornerstone. There's been a huge amount of innovation and investment into diet and exercise. And, really technology has improved the way we diet, the way we exercise, but sleep has not improved over my lifetime, at least. And so Dr. Bruce explained, if we can, our bodies are pretty out of sync with how we were designed to sleep. Your body temperature really should drop about 1.5 degrees and largely stay there, and then rise about 1.5 degrees towards wake up. There's a lot of science behind, why that happens and practically what happens with the body when that happens. And so the drop in temperature is what triggers the brain to release melatonin. And then the rise in temperature is what triggers the brain to go into the pre-wake REM cycles. And so he essentially said, if we can understand the way that your body is changing throughout the night, and adjust to keep your body at the perfect temperature, then huge amount of data that temperature regulation significantly improve sleep quality. And so, we came up with this idea, create this device that not only gives you the data, but also actually does something.
I mean, Harry, let's talk about, the 800-pound gorilla in the space, which is 8 Sleep, right? And they have all the endorsements like Huberman, et cetera. And you're kind of like coming in with this kind of AI plus affordability angle. Do you feel like that is enough to win? And how do you think about 8 Sleep and their market dominance right now?
Yeah, I think so. I used to have an 8 Sleep. My friends and I all kind of really wanted the product. At one point, it was just that bit too expensive. And so, I think the way we saw the market is that, in my opinion, they've created, great product. It's sort of the Ferrari of sleep, ultra premium, very, very expensive. And so we wanted to democratize access to sleep optimization. And we wanted to build, sort of if they're the Ferrari, we're the Tesla, where, our current product is kind of our Model S. It's about a third, almost a third cheaper than 8 Sleep. And, we want to eventually get to our Model 3, which would be a $500 price by product and really a product that could be in every American household. And so that was the goal for us. I think I think sleep is a huge TAM. It's, everybody sleeps. And for us, I don't think it's a winner takes all market. We're more interested in how can we expand the TAM, bring the price down and make this accessible to every American.
The other question I have is, you built a software product and it's bits, not atoms. Having built a couple of hardware companies myself, I know firsthand hardware is very hard. And you're dealing with like a level of complexity, sort of an order, maybe a couple of orders of magnitude more complex than software, right? Whereas software is like sort of maybe like 3D, hardware is like 2D, hardware is like 3D, in terms of like just surface area for things to go wrong. And a lot of the stuff is out of your control, right? Like supply chains, whether China imposes tariffs, whether your factory shuts down. Like what, you could have just invested into a company in this space, or you could have funded someone to do it. I mean, I guess 8 Sleep was good enough, right? It's probably served your needs well. Why start a company in hardware? And yeah, like what was your thinking? What was your thought process there?
It's a fun challenge. I think it's fun going into spaces, industries, markets where you really know nothing and just figuring it out. Hardware is extremely difficult. There's always stuff that goes wrong. And, same with any business, even software, but I think hardware is just significantly more complex, as you say. So it was a really fun challenge. And then, I was also just super passionate about the space, about product. For me, I think that longevity is the future of consumer. You look at longevity, it's sleep, diet, exercise, diet and exercise a very hard, active thing to do, and as I said, there's been a huge amount of innovation investment and really, you think about how many multi-billion-dollar businesses you can think of in diet and exercise, you could probably rattle off dozens. Whereas you look at sleep, and we spend a third of our lives sleeping, yet the innovation in sleep has been slim to none. And you think of how many multi-billion-dollar businesses you can think of in sleep, really, it's kind of, very, very few, if any. And so if wearables, I think, are going to be a huge tailwind for companies like us, where the first thing you realize when you start tracking your sleep is, I want to sleep better. So over 100 million people have an Apple Watch now, many, many millions with Aura Garmin. I think we're very complementary to those products. And so there was a huge amount of excitement about the space. And I just really cared about sleep and how to, help people like me who want to perform to the highest level, and do it for a long time, democratize access to sleep optimization.
Just curious if your experience is similar to what Mark is describing. Is hardware actually like 3 times harder than software?
I think a month of software is probably 3 times easier than an hour of hardware. Yes, yeah. I think look, with startups, there's always shit that goes wrong. It's never easy. Any company you do, it's going to be difficult. But yeah, the hardware is just, there's an order of magnitude more variables at any given time that could go wrong, which to me, it makes it way more fun.
And how does Orion work? In its essence, what is it? What's unique about it? What's really cool? What are you most proud of for the product itself?
Yeah, so it's a smart cover that goes over your mattress, and it has embedded sensors that track your sleep and your biometrics. And then we also have very small embedded water tubing, so we can control the surface temperature and thus your body temperature. And so we track your sleep, and then we adjust your body temperature to the perfect temperature for you to help you sleep better. And we learn your body over time and help improve your sleep over time. I think what's really cool as well is we have this upfront sleep test where we can track your sleep, show you pretty much most of what's wrong with your sleep on a graph, show you how body temperature affects your sleep, how your body temperature changes over the course of the night. And then we use that data to pre-program your Orion. So when it arrives on night 1, it's totally personalized to you and preset with your perfect night's sleep. I think the personalization for me is the most exciting part.
Interesting. And what kind of feedback have you heard from users and customers? Do you track that? Is there some quantitative way that you measure you've improved your sleep score by X? I know Whoop has a recovery score. I don't know, Aura has something similar. Do you guys track those, or how do you see whether what you're doing actually has an impact?
Yeah, we're working on a proper study, but for now, purely anecdotally, the feedback's been amazing. We had someone post yesterday that they got, for the first time ever after years of wearing a Whoop, they got their first 100% sleep score after using their Orion. We had someone else show they almost never get a green recovery on their Whoop. First week with the Orion, they got a green recovery every single day. So the user feedback, we've had people cry to us over the phone about, how for the first time a couple's able to sleep in the same bed. And, Dr. Michael Russo, our chief sleep officer, he always says that, he saved more marriages as a sleep doctor than he ever would have as a marital counselor. So feedback's been amazing.
Interesting. Don't other things affect sleep? Like, for example, even if you're using the Orion bed, but you ate something really bad or you're really stressed, is the Orion bed enough, or the cooling mechanism, is that enough to offset the other negative things, or will that still have an impact?
So and maybe in addition to that, like, what are the other factors that you could influence with the right bedding? So, there's like pillows and stuff that aid sleep is going into. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of different factors that affect sleep. So resting heart rate before you go to bed is probably the single biggest factor. And you think about things like, what you ate, things like how recently you worked out, things like how stressed you are, like, whether you use your phone before bed, whether you kind of had significant blue light exposure. Those all contribute to that resting heart rate before bed. Brian Johnson says if there's one longevity metric that he would convince anyone to pay close attention to, it's resting heart rate before you go to bed. And so all of the things kind of play a big factor. And then you can think of HRV as sort of the inverse of resting heart rate. So if you have a high resting heart rate, your HRV typically is going to be lower, and vice versa. So you want to shoot for a low resting heart rate before bed, and then a high and so ideal sleep environment. You want to limit blue light exposure before bed. You want to have a good wind down routine, manage your stress, try and switch off kind of hour or so before bed. I try and not eat, finish your last meal 3 hours, minimum 3 hours before you go to bed. It's really just the earlier the better. Not drink liquids, even kind of more than a sip of water 2 hours before you go to bed. And then not train kind of within a good few hours. Try train in the morning rather than evening. I think what we're doing, I think a big part of our philosophy is a lot of these products will nanny you and make you feel very guilty for, not sleeping well or, not kind of being Brian Johnson. I think for us, we try and take the approach of you give us the limited amount of hours you've got, and we're going to try and help you squeeze the juice out of every minute you have to be in bed for. And we're going to try and be much more positive about it and make you, feel good rather than feel bad. So we're working on features like, for example, a hangover mode or a training mode, a digestion mode, where if you're drinking, or if you have, you could be drinking out at the bar, and we know that there's a lot of science behind your body temperature is affected by alcohol consumption, or for example, late night digestion, if you had a big meal, or if you're training for a marathon, something like that. And so working with Dr. Michael Bruce on this, how can we create kind of a science-backed mode for each of these things where, you can be at the bar drinking and you put your bed in hangover mode before you get home. And so we alter your schedule to account for that. Or same thing with, training or big meal.
Interesting. And Brian Johnson finishes his dinner at like 11 a.m. or something, right? So, do you do things like that? Are you personally, and is that something that you think others should do? I mean, do you think there's an ideal and perfect kind of routine that people should follow to have the best longevity?
My personal opinion is longevity is 80-20. I think if you can sleep well, if you can manage stress, if you can eat as clean as you can, and exercise, 3-4 times a week, you're in really good shape. That to me is the 80%. And then I think the 20%, is kind of, things like, limiting kind of microplastic exposure or environmental toxin exposure, or, things like peptides, or the extreme things like, abstinence from alcohol, or, extreme things like finishing your last meal at 11 a.m. I think, it's amazing what Brian Johnson's doing for science. But, obviously that's not kind of, approach for every single person. I don't think you would say it is. I think, longevity is very much 80-20.
Makes sense.
What's the big vision for Orion?
I mean, yeah, like you had a good exit. You had an 8-figure exit. You have your great-great-grandfather had, huge billion-dollar company. Where do you want to take Orion? How do you see it developing? How do you see it going there? What is the big vision? I mean, I guess you kind of have the 8 sleep sort of almost path kind of outlined, which is just growing and continuing to basically stay in sort of just the sleep and the sleep cooling arena. You've seen, I guess, Aura, you've seen Whoop. They've recently expanded into like adding blood tests, right? And kind of going more into like the personalized health angle. Yeah. How do you think about what you want to build with Orion?
Our mission is to transform longevity through better sleep. So I think, if we get every single American to have, or at least feel like they had, an extra 2 hours of rest, I think that would be monumental achievement. I think we want to be the brand that owns sleep. And I think sleep is such a huge TAM. Everybody sleeps. But really there's no brand that is synonymous with helping you get that better night's sleep. So I think that's what we want to build in.
Yeah. And you're building this with your dad.
Yeah.
What's that like? And how did that happen?
It's been really good fun. I mean, I think, happened sort of naturally, we're very close. He's, been obviously a very close advisor for a long time. And was kind of good timing. And I think kind of similar business model to the company that he and our other co-founders kind of built previously. And so
he's had $1 billion exit himself, right?
Yeah. So him and then Blake and Scott, who were also doing it with, built Byte, which they founded in 2017 and then sold for 1.04 billion to Dentsply in under 3 years.
Wow. So who gets to, when you guys have a conflict, who gets to make the end call, end decision, final decision making? How does that work? Do you guys ever disagree? How do you manage disagreements?
Yeah, I think, I think it's about going into founding a business with someone. You're gonna have a million disagreements, and it's about being able to disagree well. I think someone like your dad, you probably had a million disagreements. We've had a million disagreements over the years, but it's always been handled well. And so we've been pretty kind of battle worn at handling conflict and resolving that conflict. And so, we're generally pretty aligned on things, but when problems do come up, we kind of pretty good at solving it.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's your take on just generally where things are going in the startup market right now? I mean, you built a software company, and now you're seeing a lot of AI tools enabling people to build and rebuild apps that maybe took years to build. Now you can build them in an afternoon, right? So it feels like software is in some ways going to be a lot less defensible than it was before. I'm curious what you think more broadly as a lot of entrepreneurs listen to us, a lot of folks want to build products and build companies. Do you think that that's correct? And do you think that building a hardware company is partially a moat because it'll take AI a bit longer to get to hardware than just software? How do you advise entrepreneurs who are looking to start something now?
Yeah, I think I'll say two things, and those two things largely conflict, but I think there are going to be huge ramifications, particularly on software, which has been for the last 25 years, really the last 15, 20 years, the greatest business model since oil. But then counterpoint number two is the world typically moves slower than we think. And I think that in an AGI world, hardware and brand are the last two true moats. And the brand is an obvious moat. The sort of marginal utility between a Louis Vuitton handbag and a fake Louis Vuitton handbag is zero, but people are willing to pay, thousands of dollars for the real one versus the fake one, despite it carrying the same goods because of brand. Brand is an obvious moat. Then, hardware just in a world where 73% of our code base is AI through Cursor or
only 73?
73%.
I heard the statistic that from Darius, the Anthropic founder, he's saying most of the code now being written at Anthropic is all AI generated, pretty much virtually all of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think for us, maybe some of the firmware is probably a little bit more
makes sense.
Challenging with that. But we're majority AI-driven code. That's 750,000 lines of code in the last month. I think were AI generated. And in a sort of AGI world, it's going to be extremely easy to vibe code pretty much any consumer app, and vast majority of vertical SaaS companies, especially when you're selling into sophisticated sort of technical customers that can build things themselves. And so competition is going to be, this company won't go away, but competition will be significantly greater and margins will be significantly compressed. Whereas in hardware, it's, the atoms not bits, it just takes significantly more time. It's, good 18-month product cycle if at an all-out sprint, plus significant capital investment to get something off the ground. I think it's, and you look at, most of the biggest companies in the world, you look at Apple, Tesla, Nvidia, the hardware companies. So I think it's a lot more difficult to start a hardware company and get a hardware company really off the ground. But once you do, I think especially in an AGI world, the upside could be significantly bigger.
Yeah. One of the things that made hardware easy or easier to make was globalization, right? And supply chains being global and frankly, labor being really cheap in China, where the supply chain was for a lot of these things. In a world that's like fragmenting with tariffs and trade wars, how do you think about diversifying your supply chain? How do you think about making sure you don't get caught off guard by a 20, 30% tariff or maybe, I mean, in the worst case, some kind of conflict, which if the US and China get into a conflict over Taiwan or otherwise, completely puts your business at risk if you're manufacturing over there.
So for us, we came about in a time, we were born in a time of absolute uncertainty. We were building our supply chain during a global tariff war. And so we didn't know next week, we'd find a factory in China and then a week later there'd be 150% tariff on that. And then we didn't know if that would be halved or tripled, by the time we woke up the next morning. So I think that supply chain, if you're manufacturing things that are critical to national security, you've got to just think domestic. And then, if it's sort of not in that boat, then you've got to just think diversified. And so, I think big on diversifying supply chain early on. And because of the time that we came about, we haven't done any difference.
So your supply chain is diversified?
We're diversifying as much as we can. And we've kind of built our team in a way where we fully own all the engineering and own all the industrialization. So we can up and move very quickly as needed.
Makes sense. That's cool.
And what do you think is going to be like the biggest challenge for you in the next year or two moving forward? Is it supply chain? Is it getting the product out, the word out? What are you most worried about this year?
I think, it's really just kind of, I think we built the foundation to scale. We've got an incredible product. We've got an amazing team, and an amazing team that can kind of move very, very quickly. We've been fortunate to kind of raise enough money to get to cash flow positive. So it's about scaling and, scaling is going to come with operational challenges. And so, it's kind of dealing with those and being, maintaining our nimbleness, whilst our team grows significantly.
Right. And I guess biggest question for this audience is, when are you launching in Australia and New Zealand? Any plans?
Yeah. We get that question a lot. I have been surprised at just how much demand there's been in Australia and New Zealand. So it's definitely on the roadmap. TBD on date. You guys will be the first to know.
Amazing. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think this the people here I noticed are very, very into health and longevity and all of that. So I'm sure this would be a great market for you.
Totally.
Harry,
great.
One kind of deeper question to close it off. What do you believe that Peter Thiel kind of asked this question? What do you believe that others don't? And what is like an insight or a mental model that you have that you believe is true that most people don't believe?
I think that founders massively over-index on competition and trying to secure monopoly and kind of worrying about the competition and what they do or don't do. I think that, there's a quote where most companies die of suicide, not homicide. So I think that founders need to kind of think less about everyone else and think less about, having no competition at all and just focus on winning.
Makes sense. Rapid fire. I got a few rapid fire questions. One piece of hardware besides your phone you can't live without.
My Orion's the obvious one.
Any others?
I would say probably my AirPods. I mean, I use those just all day.
Best purchase you made after the Fanfix exit?
I only made one purchase, which was a watch, and I love watches, so it made me very happy.
What's one trend in the longevity space that needs to die immediately?
Thinking that that there are zero potential downsides and side effects to pretty recent drug or peptide discoveries.
Final one. How old would you want to live till?
I think 100 is I think 100 is a good age, but I'm more interested in health span. So 100, super healthy, still able to, play soccer with my great grandkids, would be the dream.
Do you think people will be able to live to 200?
I think so. I think that I think that we're about to hit an inflection point probably in the next 10 years where if you can stay healthy, and I think that's why 20 of longevity is so important. If you can stay healthy for these next 10, 20 years, I think the scale of innovation we're going to see will be like nothing humans could possibly imagine.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the theses of our fund, and that's why we invested into you. I mean, I genuinely believe that longevity will move from, just that whole space in general will move from being a biology research problem to an engineering problem. Because I think we now understand how it actually all works, how to reset cells, and we just need to figure out how to do it precisely, roll cells back to the right age, and then we can just keep doing that. So yeah, it's very exciting time, and you're building a very exciting company, Harry. Congrats on everything you've done so far, and we're very excited to see how Orion does, and to get one in Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah,
amazing. Thanks so much, Mark and Hendrik.
Cool.
Awesome.
Great to have you on. Thanks, Harry.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you for tuning in to TechMates. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with friends. We'll be back soon with more stories of Kiwi and Aussie founders reshaping the future and disrupting down under. Until next time, keep dreaming big and daring to disrupt.